Well, hello, Sandy.
Hello, Amy, festive Amy. For
Yeah,
those who see her, she has a beautiful sweater on, very festive.
it's holiday season, and yeah, I got a little some snowflakes and red, and it makes
A
a
Christmas tree in the background.
Christmas tree. Yes, it's just it's the holidays. It's that time of the year. So, how are you doing?
Good. My background was my dog looking in the back door to let him in. But funny, I'm great, but it's really beautiful here in Durango and it goes back and forth. And as we still have snow drifts, I'm walking the dog and I see a man on his bike, which is very common. But in the winter, people still go out. He had on just shorts, Amy.
Oh,
Helmet, shoes, no shirt, no pants. And I said, wow, Durango version of polar plunge, huh?
right, right.
So there you go.
It's not that warm, right?
You must be working out a lot harder than me.
Yeah, funny. All right, so today we're going to talk about humility, about being um, what's the word?
Humble.
Humble. There it is. Okay, so we're going to talk about humility and being humble. And so, um, what do you think of this? Like when you think of humble, what do you think of?
I think my gut reaction is it's this very complimentary word. It's something we all should be. But yet, as I thought about it and dug deeper, I think there's deeper connotations to that. And it's not just, it's kind of like be kind, be humble. There's certain words that I don't think we even really think about that much, but their expectations are what we should be. So, hey, to answer your question, initially when we talked about this, I thought, what a great thing. And I'm not saying it's bad, but I think it's deeper than that. And maybe from what your background is too. So what do you think?
You know what? The same thing. And actually, when I was researching this, I was thinking, oh, what are the positive things of being humble? And then I was like, okay, I'm going to flip it. What are the negative things of being humble? Because you're right. There's tons of articles out there of the benefits of being humble, the what the rewards are if you're humble. And we don't like people who aren't humble, right? Like
Right.
people who are like always pushing themselves and, making themselves greater or whatever. We don't like that. So that we try to, so humble is a good thing, right?
Should be, can be, depends on where you go with it. Because
Right, right.
I think it's so easy to say, okay, if I'm not humble, that means I have ego, right? I don't want to have ego, so we should all be humble. Just like kind. I'll use kind. If you're
Yeah.
not kind, you're mean, right? So then what does it really dig in a little bit deeper? And where this it came out of a good place, because where this subject came from with Amy and I, if any listeners haven't listened to our last episode, it was on diversity, equity, and inclusion with Bev Young, who very passionately told us about all the great work she's done in that area as working in HR for a big healthcare group. And I had told Amy after the call, we were both like blown away, just really enjoyed the conversation. It was energizing. And I made the comment to Amy, Bev is so humble. It was in talking with her when she and I took a trip together that I realized all the accomplishments that she's had. And all these years, I've known her since I was 3 years old. And of course, she's done these accomplishments over the years, but I said, she's so humble. She is one of the most successful people I know. And I don't know if everybody knows that, because Bev would never lead with that. She'd lead with what she's done. Not that she's done it, but she talks about the things that she is passionate about and the initiatives that will energize other people, right? It's not about her, it's about the things and the issues and the empowerment and to empower others, not to give herself the pat on the back. So this is where it started. And Amy and I were both like, oh my gosh, let's talk about being humble because that's a good message. But then, of course, as we start thinking about it, I'm like, it's a little deeper than that, right?
Yes, I think there's totally a balance because you don't want to be perceived as arrogant or a show off, right? But you also don't want to be a pushover. Like there's got to be a balance of um, promoting yourself and advocating for yourself. I would say advocating is probably a pretty big word, and feeling empowered to do that, but not being a push, like being mean to other people and making yourself look like you're better. And one of the things I was thinking of, which you're pretty good at this, you're really good at social media and you're good at finding that balance of showing what you're doing, but not being a show off. You know, like you do a nice job of having that balance. I remember when I started my business, I had a really hard time thinking of marketing because it was marketing me. That I was the product, and to be humble, but also show what you're doing and how you're doing it and why people should hire you is kind of finding that right balance.
And I think one thing I'd say, and the social media is a great example because that's something that everybody can relate to. You would think most people, if you're listening, you're picking it up somewhere, right? And I think about that a lot, to make sure I guess it is being humble in it, but I always go back to what's my motive. Because here's the reality. There are going to be people, and there are people out there that probably say Sandy's a show off. She's always posting, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the end of the day, I don't care because I know that my motive is pure. And for instance, I love to post pictures of people on their birthday. And I have this huge arsenal because it's in my Google Drive. And it's very easy because I do a good job of labeling faces or when they come in. So all I have to do is I could type in Amy. And of course, I have a lot of pictures because of marketing our podcast.
Yeah.
I could see every picture posted. But I tell you 80% of the time, the pictures don't include me. So it's not about me. And it's not supposed to be about, I have a better relationship. The whole point of doing it is that usually it's pictures people have never seen before. They forgot about. It elicits conversation that centers on whoever's birthday it is. And 90% of the time I'll get a note back saying, oh my gosh, thank you for that. You gave me a laugh, brought back memories, brought back a dialogue, which is my motive, right?
Right. Exactly.
Now, if I took one criticism, which again, they're out there, oh gosh, Sandy's posting again, I could say, I'm just not going to do it. So part of doing things, because I will say that is, not everything I do with humility, but that one I do with a motive of humility. Because not everybody has the stash of pictures I have, but you have to look the other way sometimes too, because not everybody's going to pat you on the back and say, good job, right?
Right. Right. And as long as your motives are pure and you're not trying to be show off, then I think you're fine. Which I never feel like you are with your social media post. I think it's important though. So there are some cons to being humble, but there's also some pros to being humble. And one of the things I was thinking of, I was recently interviewing somebody for a position, and they had been in a role of leadership. And I was asking them questions about, situations and stuff like that in their leadership role. And they were so inclusive of everybody that was working together. Almost every time I asked a question, his reply was, we handled it by doing this. We did this, or it might have been, I asked this question and we decided. And, or, it was talking about how he was leading the group, but he wasn't the only person in the room making all those decisions. And I thought that was a really good sign of being humble, because he could have said, I did this, I did that, because it was all very positive stuff, but he was inclusive, recognizing that there were more people making those decisions.
Okay, I'm going to ask, and I think for you, I know and believe the answer, male versus female. Male acts like this and makes a comment like this, we don't always expect it, because usually men can get more of a buy for ego, right? Or for show off. So when they don't, we give them a bigger pat on the back. And I'm going to say society, because they're not acting that way. If a female were to give that answer, I think there's more of an expectation toward it with a lot of people that it's, so is there more of a pat on the back, male versus female? Sometimes, or not at all. And I'm not saying with
That's-
you, Amy, but I think
no, I get what you're saying. I don't know. Like, that's a really good question. I will tell you, with men and women, I'm going to tell you, I notice people who are arrogant and put themselves first
right.
for men and women. So I don't know. For me, I don't know if it's a perception. It probably depends. I'm not sure.
I'll give
Like
you
it,
another example. All the years I was in public accounting and building a business, we did networking events all the time. And so for 20 years, and probably 10 of those, I was constantly going to networking events, right? And usually it was like a meet and greet. Bring your top salespeople, like the attorney firm meets the accounting firm, the banking groups. We are constantly having these meet and greets with two groups of people that always would end with, you know, you do some socializing, but then we'd all have to stand and go around the room and talk about yourselves. And I would tell you, Amy, the men had no problem saying, here, you know, 5 seconds, or not 5 seconds, 1 minute or less, here's my highlight reel. And the women really, I knew their accomplishments, would tend to shy away from it. So
okay. Yes.
use this as an example. So in fact, it got to the point where women, we would challenge each other because we'd get mistaken for just being the peon managers who didn't have a book of business, because we just had a really hard time saying, I'm great, you know,
Right.
because the networking event, you're supposed to tell your highlight reel about the things that you do that are great, to go back and forth. But the women had a much harder time doing that, always.
So that I completely agree with. Like, in networking situations, when you have to do some self-promotion,
Yes.
then I think it is much harder for women to self-promote themselves.
And I even would find myself almost enjoying and leaning on being overly humble. Like I'd be like, oh, no big deal. Even telling people I kind of work part-time, just minimizing everything I did. Like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, to the point where there have been times that people would ask me, like men saying, asking me for a drink, or like handing me their coat because they thought I was like a receptionist or something, because I would be so dismissive to myself. So is that humble? Right? Is that when we say be humble, be kind, is that what's the fine line between being humble and self-promotion?
Right. Right. I think and that's such a good question. It's exuding confidence and knowing what you're capable of, and also sharing that with people, but not being salesy and not being like, aren't I great? It's just like, this is what I do. These are the facts, and not filling it with all the big adjectives of the things you do.
And kind of like the example you gave of the guy you were interviewing, he gave his highlight reel, but it always included other people, because at the end of the day, none of our accomplishments are solo. And it doesn't mean you have to give credit like you're giving a thank you at the Academy Awards for everything you did, but including others in some part of that isn't being humble.
So one of the things I was thinking of, when we have been interviewing people and having them as guests, and you're like, okay, how do we put the I in this issue? Like, what can I do about it? And that's how I think of this leadership issue, or this humility issue. It's the I is like the things that you want to do different I need to do this different. I want to do this different. So if it's something that you want to fix, that's an I. But if it's something you want to celebrate, a lot of times it should be a we, because there's always people who are
Something you
part
wanna
of that
celebrate. That's a
celebration.
great
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. So I know when I was working on the board, we did this really big thing of changing management companies. And everybody walks up and congratulates me on getting that done. And I was like, I always say thank you, because it was a really big deal. But I also say there were a lot of people in the room to make this happen. So I say thank you, I take the credit, but I also say, there was a whole group of people that made this happen. It wasn't just me, right? Because and that's very true. But sharing that celebration, I think, includes everybody in the success. So it's not just you being the star of the show.
That's a great point. I like how you approach that too, because I'm not great. We've talked about this in other podcasts about getting a compliment and immediately, pushing it to other people, but starting with a thank you and acknowledging the compliment. And I think there's always a good time to pause too, because my natural reaction would be to be just spew of the mouth and say, oh, I didn't do anything. They did everything. That would be my natural reaction. And
Yeah.
say
So
thank you. Say thank you. Acknowledge it, accept it.
that is something I've learned. And I'm going to say I've probably learned it just from our conversations over the last few years of accepting the compliments, because that's like, don't dismiss it, because what you're really doing, if somebody says something like that, you're dismissing it.
Right.
And then it's actually, and this is probably the way this is why I do it, because it's actually hurtful to them to dismiss it. Like, it might make you feel better, but if I give somebody a compliment and they're like, it wasn't a big deal, and it's like, all right, well, I thought it was a big deal, and so then it's like, dismissing it doesn't make it good.
Right. Very good point.
Yeah. But it's hard. I will tell you, it's hard.
And nobody wants to be told the opposite, right? Back to, I think the flip is if somebody doesn't, let's just say the opposite, that the female does come out just like the guys in this networking event and gives her her highlight reel. And in the exact same way, there's going to be people in the crowd that say, oh, she's got ego, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
you can't change everybody's mind, and it's a tough life if you're trying to make everyone happy, because they're just not going to be.
Right. And I think there's a time for ego, but it can't be all the time.
Right.
Yeah. Like, there's a time, a networking event, you have a minute, that's when you should show it off. The rest of the hour, probably you don't have to do it, so it's finding that balance. One thing I was reading when I was doing the research was that humility magnifies your strengths. That's one of the positives of being being humble. I'm like, I keep fumbling over to humble, the word humble.
Humility magnifies your strengths.
I know. So
I wrap my brain around that.
That's what I thought. And here's what it says. Humility is the trait that magnifies all other positive attributes. Without humility, all of the leader's other strengths would be diminished, if not invisible. It strengthens trust, it builds confidence and loyalty among others. I can see where it strengthens trust.
Mm-hmm.
I do see that. Builds confidence. I think trust and confidence. Like, if I had confidence in you, I'd have to have trust in you. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was an interesting one, though. So it magnifies your
way to think about it. And then here's my next question. Can you teach confidence, whether it be, can you teach humility, whether it be, we're going to get this word right. Humble, humility.
When you said, can you teach confidence? I was like, haven't we talked about this before?
Too many candy canes today. But can you teach humility, whether it be someone who works for you? Let's say you have the opposite. There's somebody who works for you, you interview that got hired, that you're finding, wow, they, a little bit of humility could go a long way here. Or with our kids, our adult children, can we teach humility? And how?
Um, okay. I don't know the right answer to this. I'll just say that, but I would say yes. I think you can teach it. I think it would take some coaching of, trying to figure out why they feel like they need to do it. What's the root cause? I always go through that 5 why scenario. Why do they feel like they need to put themselves up here above everybody else? Why do they think they're always right, or whatever it is, and trying to dig into that and help them realize what they're doing to other people in the room when they are showing off their ego.
I'm Googling it. Where's AI for us? Oh, here we go. 24 million results. We're not the first one. Can you teach humility? But is humility teachable? The short answer is yes. Truly humble leaders don't try to impress others with titles, credentials, or accomplishments. They pull out the best in others. Now, I'm not reading the whole article, but I think that's saying teach it by example, maybe. Which I think there's a lot to be said for that, teaching by example, because when we have somebody in our lives that how they act and behave, is there any better teacher than to want to exemplify ourselves to be the same? And I've always said that with my kids. I could talk till I'm blue in the face and when I'm talking to them, but how I show them in action. And whether it's good, bad, I've always said I could tell them, here's what you need to do in a relationship, but the best thing I can do is teach them by when they spend time with Garrett and I and how we treat each other and what we're like when we're together. That's the best way we can teach them about relationships, right?
Right. And also, here's the other thing that I've noticed with me growing up. I remember when my parents would point out when other people were doing good things, so
Great point.
I always thought of that with my kids. You're at the store and you see somebody doing something, you point it out and you're like, look how kind that person is, or whatever it is. Pointing out people who are humble and say, I love their humility about this, and they're not taking all the credit. And I think that helps people recognize that you think that is such a good thing instead of, showing off who you are.
Right. Right.
I don't know. But I will say sometimes that falls on deaf ears. So I don't think it's a win-win.
And I'm looking at one, they said, okay, modeling. So here's one where they say, this is with children, how to teach your children humility. And number 1 is modeling, teaching by example. 2 is building them up. Interesting. It's important to understand that humility always comes from a position of belief, strength, and self-assurance. So it's kind of the opposite. That's an interesting way to think about it. You'd think you'd be adding ego by building somebody up. But what this is basically saying is the more self-assured and belief in yourself you have, the more humble you are as a human being. So by building wow, that is very interesting. And I think that might be spot on.
I completely believe that. Because I think the people who are the most confident are not the ones who are arrogant. The people who are the most capable are not the arrogant ones. It's typically the ones who are trying to prove that they are.
Because they have underlying insecurities.
Yeah.
Damn, Amy. I like that. Oh, this is another good one. Encourage and help them do what they can be the very best at, no matter what they do. You know how to do it. That kind of is a little bit like strengths, putting your best foot forward in the way that you're going to have the most success, meaning don't try to do it like everybody else, right? Oh, next one's value. I like this one. Make sure they understand where their real value comes from. Then you're kind of, just
Oh,
like you
yeah.
said, back to the insecurities and trying to say you're something that you're not. You're going to be much more humble is if you're doing something back to the belief set that you're doing, you fully know that you're putting your best foot forward and it's following your value proposition. Oh,
Right.
some
Yes.
people that have ego are those that have been humiliated a lot. That's kind of sad.
So here's something that strikes me as one of the pitfalls of being too humble is you will be perceived as a person with little or no confidence. And that kind of goes to the point of the people who are less humble. Sometimes we think they're the most confident, but it's actually like we're perceiving, but it's the opposite. Like it's this whole swap.
And I think too, it's all about initial perceptions because, I think we've all been a little bit hoodwinked by people that show this great confidence. And when it doesn't take very long to kind of be able to see that it's really not there. It happens
Yeah.
all the times with celebrities, politicians, you
Wow.
name it, somebody in power. And that's not all though. Many exude confidence and they really have everything to back it up. And
Yeah.
then some are covering something up, right?
Right. I hate to throw politics in here, but I think of Trump
Right.
and how he is the least humble person I've ever seen in the role of president, as in my lifetime. I don't know if it's forever, but he took a lot of credit when things were good. And then he passed a lot of blame if something wasn't good. And to me, that's not showing humility at all. It's just,
But 50% of the population admires that quality.
I know, isn't that interesting? That's just so interesting to me.
Because even, back to initial, everybody knows it is what it is. And even when it is what it is, I'll have people that say to me, I think that's great. I do it all day long. Which I guess it gets back to our initial question, to be humble or not.
Well,
It depends on how you define success. Is success followers, money? Is success how you're going to be rated in history and how you've impacted other people? I guess it depends on how you evaluate success.
and to this point, if you perceive people who are humble, perceive them as not having much confidence because they're not showing off and they're not, then you probably do lean towards people who are a little bit more arrogant because you're like, oh, they don't have humility, but boy, aren't they great?
Aren't they great?
All right. Oh, so
Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble. Now I'm bringing up religion when you're perfect in every way.
right.
Gosh, you brought it all in, Amy. What haven't we hit yet?
I know. What else do we need to hit? What's the other do not talk about? Okay. So let's go back to our original question when we first started this podcast, the real and the ideal.
Hmm?
Like, what's the real in this?
I think humble's hard. I think humble is, I think we think it sounds so easy because we say it like be humble, but it's hard to project it in the right way, not overthink it. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe I'm going to the ideal. It's humble is hard, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's this authenticity that you have to be okay with yourself and to be humble, but also the ideal, I'm just going to say, is finding that balance between humility and arrogance or self-promotion, whatever it is you need to do. Humility and confidence. How
I
about
like
that?
that. I like that. We got this. It's a new year. We got
I got
this.
this.
I
Yes.
think, I think, and you've got the humble thing down very well, Amy, but we can all
You
focus.
too.
Thank you.
I think you're pretty humble. And
Thank
you're also confident.
you. Notice I'm saying thank you and I'm gonna
You're
stop
welcome. Nice job.
you. Little role playing here.
All right. So, well, we're at the holidays. I just want to say happy holidays. Enjoy your time with family and friends. And I guess we'll be seeing each other in the new year.
The new year, yay, 2024. We got this.
All right.
Happy
Thank you.
holidays, Amy. Bye-bye.
Bye.